Have you ever wondered whether some episodes of Band of Brothers are more historically accurate than others? In this video, I will rank every episode according to how faithfully it portrays the real events. In 10th place is Replacements. This episode follows the new replacements joining Easy Company after the fighting in Normandy and also covers the opening half of Operation Market Garden. My main problem with the episode is its overall timeline. Easy Company's principal objective was to capture the bridge across the Wilhelmina Canal before advancing into Eindhoven. In the series, the company appears simply to walk into the city without encountering much difficulty. In reality, the bridge was blown up, and the battalion met determined German resistance during its advance towards Eindhoven. Lieutenant Robert Brewer was wounded during this fighting, rather than at Nieuwenen. Several other moments, including Roy Cobb's treatment of the replacements and Herbert Sobel appearing at the airfield, were entirely fictional. The fighting at Nieuwenen was somewhat exaggerated, while the much larger battle at Weckel, which occurred later, was omitted altogether. Overall, the episode does not provide a particularly accurate account of Easy Company's early experiences in Holland. In 9th place is The Last Patrol. This episode concentrates mainly on David Webster and Lieutenant Henry Jones. Webster had returned to Easy Company after recovering from wounds received in Holland, while Jones was a newly arrived replacement officer. The main difficulty with this episode is that its largely fictional story is narrated by Webster, even though he kept a detailed diary describing what happened at Hagenau. The series presents Webster as something of an outsider, but in his book Parachute Infantry, he wrote that returning to Easy Company felt like coming home to his family. According to Webster, everyone welcomed him back. Neither Webster nor John Martin actually participated in the patrol, despite being placed at the center of the television version. Lieutenant Jones was also portrayed rather poorly. The series depicts him as an officer lacking both confidence and character. In reality, Webster described Jones as friendly but somewhat cocky. Although Jones did participate in the patrol, he did not need to request permission to join it. The drunken incident involving Roy Cobb did not concern Jones either. It was Jack Foley who confronted Cobb, resulting in Cobb's arrest and eventual court-martial. In 8th place is Bastogne. This episode focuses on Easy Company medic Eugene Rowe. Although I am pleased that Rowe was chosen as its central character, the storyline surrounding him was almost entirely fictional. According to Eugene's daughter, the Rowe family was not partly Cajun. Their ancestry was actually predominantly German. The inclusion of the Belgian nurse Renée Lemaire was another welcome element of the story. Renée, however, worked at an aid station that was not connected with the airborne. It is therefore doubtful that she and Doc Rowe ever met. Easy Company's experiences at Bastogne in 1944 were also slightly overstated. For much of the battle, the company occupied part of the defensive perimeter and experienced relatively little direct fighting, until the German attack on Christmas Eve, during which Walter Gordon was wounded. By comparison, the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 506th carried a much heavier burden during the defense of Bastogne. Although the opening of the campaign appears at the end of the previous episode, Crossroads, I am including those scenes as part of Bastogne. Lighting petrol fires anywhere near Bastogne, particularly at night, was probably the most serious technical error in the entire series. Easy Company also did not march to its positions in darkness, and snow did not begin falling until the 3rd day after its arrival. In 7th place is Day of Days. I enjoyed this episode, and its portrayal of the assault on Brécourt Manor was generally faithful to history. What I disliked was the large number of inaccuracies in the events leading up to that attack. John Hall is presented as an important character throughout the episode, but he was not the soldier who met Winters and fought beside him after the Normandy landings. John Hall was killed when his C-47 was struck while approaching its intended drop zone. The soldier killed at Brécourt was John D. Halls, who had spent the night alongside Frederick Heiliger. Winters later wrote that the man with him was actually a supply sergeant belonging to Fox Company. I have already discussed the scene involving Ronald Speirs shooting German prisoners in other videos, but once again, the incident was inaccurately portrayed. The closing epilogue also misspells Gerald Lorraine's surname and completely leaves John Hall off the list of men who received medals. In 6th place is Carentan. The timeline in the 3rd episode was reasonably accurate, but the story still contained a number of problems. Ronald Speirs appears during the fighting at Carentan. Although he was still serving as a platoon leader in Dog Company at the time, he would not have been wandering around Easy Company's positions offering instructions or advice. The passwords Flash and Thunder, heard at Bloody Gulch, were also used only on D-Day. Albert Blythe's story was largely invented, apart from the temporary blindness he experienced. The claim that Blythe died in 1948 because of wounds received in 1944 remains one of the series' greatest points of controversy with viewers. The Edelweiss scenes were also fictional additions, as was the appearance of the Jagdpanther tank destroyer. In fifth place is Why We Fight. There is not a great deal to examine in this episode, as its only substantial storyline concerns the discovery of Kaufering, one of the subcamps belonging to the Dachau concentration camp complex. Easy Company did not discover or liberate a concentration camp. The 12th Armored Division had found the camp a day before the 506th arrived in the region, and the German guards had already abandoned it. The episode shows many members of Easy Company walking throughout the camp, embracing prisoners and attempting to help them. In reality, only a small number of soldiers were permitted to approach or enter the site. Disease posed a considerable danger, and access to what was effectively an enormous crime scene was strictly controlled. The episode also wrongly gives the date of Hitler's death as April 11th rather than April 30th. One particularly powerful moment shows Lewis Nixon entering the home of a German general and throwing the man's portrait onto the floor. In real life, however, it was Richard Winters who did this. In fourth place is Crossroads. I have few serious complaints about this episode until the story reaches the scenes involving Winters in Paris. Winters himself disliked his portrayal during this sequence because he believed it made him appear attracted to the boy aboard the train. He also maintained that he did not experience wartime flashbacks. My other concern is the portrayal of Buck Compton near the conclusion of the episode. The writers show him developing post-traumatic stress at Mormillon, a condition that continues through the following 2 episodes set at Bastogne. In his own book, Buck stated that he felt mentally and physically strong after recovering from the wound he received in Holland. He did not attend the film screening shown in the series, nor did he have such an encounter with Winters. Lieutenant Norman Dike is also introduced towards the episode's conclusion. The episode says that the men were already calling Dike Foxhole Norman. This dialogue was inserted to prepare the audience for his later failure. At that stage, however, Easy Company had not yet entered combat under its new commanding officer. In third place is The Breaking Point. Without question, this was the most dramatic and emotionally powerful episode of the series. The deaths of Donald Hubler, Warren Skip Muck and Alex Pencala were treated respectfully. Hubler's confrontation with a German officer on horseback did not occur in the way it is shown. Nevertheless, if creative license is going to be used, this was an effective example of how to use it. The wounding of Guarnier and Toy was portrayed much as it happened. Lieutenant Dike is the principal subject of debate surrounding this episode. As I have explained in previous videos, I believe he was treated very unfairly. Dike was assigned to Easy Company to gain leadership experience before advancing further through the command structure. He certainly accomplished that later in the war when he served as an aide to General Maxwell Taylor. It is extremely unlikely that Dike would have received command of a company if the division had known it was about to enter combat. Dike was an experienced and capable soldier. His Bronze Stars in Holland and Bastogne were earned through genuine combat service. At Bastogne, however, he was placed in an extremely difficult position, commanding strangers who were unlikely ever to accept or respect him. During the attack on Foy, Dike ordered the advance to halt. The writers greatly exaggerated the consequences for the battalion by showing soldiers falling everywhere around him. In reality, only 1 man was killed during the approach to Foy. The remaining casualties occurred after the troops had entered the village, with most being shot by a sniper. Dike may have been wounded during the assault, causing him to stop, but this has never been conclusively established. Neither Winters nor Lipton mention such a wound in their memoirs. Another problem with the Foy sequence is the portrayal of Ronald Speirs running past German soldiers and tanks. In Speirs' own description of the battle, he crossed an exposed field while under fire from a German 88mm gun and made contact with I Company. This explains why Speirs did not receive a citation for the action, although he was undoubtedly still deserving of recognition. The entire sequence appears designed to contrast Dike as a coward with Speirs as a hero. In my opinion, this comparison was deeply unfair. In second place is points. There is relatively little to criticize in this episode, largely because not very much happened following Hagenau. Dick Winters made sure that the story suggested Easy Company was the first Allied formation to reach Berchtesgaden, a belief he always defended strongly. The shooting of Chuck Grant was condensed for television but otherwise portrayed effectively, as were the scenes at the Eagle's Nest. In the final epilogue, Buck Compton is shown returning to the company in Austria, but this did not happen. Following his removal from the front at Bastogne, Buck was evacuated to Paris and remained there until his discharge in 1945. I also believe the closing epilogue could have provided considerably more detail. Sobel, Guarnere, Toy, and Malarkey were all important enough to deserve a mention. There are also several other scenes worth discussing. The encounter involving Sobel and the salute did not happen in the manner shown, and David Webster was not part of the group assigned to locate and kill the German camp commandant. In first place is Currahee. I believe one of the major reasons for the success of Band of Brothers was the strength of its opening episode. Much of this came from David Schwimmer's performance as Captain Sobel and Damian Lewis's portrayal of Dick Winters. The opening scene in which Sobel inspects 2nd Platoon established the direction and tone of the entire series. Although Currahee covers nearly 2 years of training, it follows most of Easy Company's movements while remaining largely faithful to the historical record. Perhaps for the only time in the series, the destruction of an individual's reputation, in this instance Herbert Sobel's, was reasonably close to reality. However, I do not agree with the way Sobel was represented in the later episodes. Although the first episode still contains several mistakes, including showing David Webster and Roy Cobb as members of Easy Company at Toccoa, its overall story feels more like a historical documentary than a typical Hollywood production. Which were your favorite and least favorite episodes in the series? Do you agree with my rankings? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe.